So welcome everybody today. I am here as Pete Brennan with Naturally Bay Area. Naturally Bay Area is part of the Naturally Network, and this is the kickoff to Sustainability Week slash Earth Week. I am so glad to have everybody here with us to welcome Alyssa Harding of One Step Closer OSC and an amazing panel that we are here to talk to about kicking off your journey on sustainable packaging. So thank you, welcome. Alyssa, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Awesome, and thank you all for joining us. I think when it comes to climate action and food waste and mission-driven brands, one of the topics that really rises to the top is packaging. And with a system that's been optimized for pricing and efficiency of petroleum-based plastics, we're all kind of caught up on how the heck do we even get this journey started. So today you're going to hear from Jane, Jake, and Kate about their stories and their sustainability journeys. They represent different types of companies, different positions in the value chain. And so I think today you'll hear about some great resources, best practice, and how to get momentum behind your packaging journey. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick things off. First question for everybody. Can you just introduce yourself, your role, and give us a quick overview on your company's work around sustainable packaging? So we'll start with Jane.
Sure. Thanks, Alyssa, and hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Happy Earth Week. So my name is Jane Frank, and I'm with Nume Organic Tea. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Sourcing and Sustainability. And our journey with sustainable packaging has kind of started with the birth of our company in 1999. So we initially, when we went to market at that time, all tea bag or all packaged tea, if you walked up and down the tea aisle, was wrapped in a cellophane wrap, not a shrink wrap, but like a cellophane kind of wraparound thing. And so we made the conscious decision, not to go to market in that cellophane wrap, thinking, why does the consumer need that? And that really marked the beginning of our journey. And along the way, in the last 22 years now, we've questioned every piece of our packaging and gone through it methodically. And so, yeah, we're here to share more about that journey today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. And we will go to Jake next.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. Happy to be here today. My name is Jake Hebert. I'm the Senior Manager of Sales and Marketing with Futsamura. We are a flexible film manufacturer. We make plant-based compostable films under the brand name NatureFlex. And kind of what we're doing is taking something old and making it cool again. We manufacture cellulose films, which has been around since about 1910. But fell out of favor over the last several decades because of cheaper alternatives. But cellophane films are inherently not only bio-based but compostable as well. So we're kind of revamping cellophane, if you will, under the compostable benefits of NatureFlex. So we are actually generally a few steps removed from brands, in that we sell mostly to converters and printers who take our films, turn them into finished packaging to sell to brands. But we work very closely with the brands through this whole journey, because it is, it can be a complicated and challenging process. So we kind of work as consultants, I guess, if you will, with brands through that journey. And we're one of the founding partners of the OSC Packaging Collaborative as well. So I've been working on sustainable packaging with the brands on this call and with many others for quite some time. So happy to be here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And don't let Jake understate his influence on the Packaging Collaborative. Truly, between Futamura, Elk, Dun Paper, and PSI, we've got a lot of great material partners that have been able to support companies like Jane's and Kate's, right, making moves around their packaging progress. So, Kate, over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Kaplan. I head up operations for Oakland Coffee Works. We are a small coffee company in Oakland. Surprisingly. And we were actually founded by the members of the band Green Day. They're really committed to coffee and sustainability as well. So for over a decade, they had talked about starting a coffee company, but they didn't want to do anything that would add to just the plastic trash problem in the world. They say they have a lot of seedy plastic case guilt. So we actually launched in 2015, and as far as we know, we are the only coffee company in the world to exclusively use certified compostable packaging. So all of our 12-ounce coffee bags and all of our single-serve pods are BPI certified, compostable. And yeah, it's been really wonderful working with OSC, and Futamura has been a huge help. So again, Jake understating his importance in this whole chain. Yeah, so we're happy to be here. It's always great to connect with other like-minded companies, and we love Numi too. Oakland, just down the street. So it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And I think what you guys will find is that Kate and Jane have different approaches that they'll share for you on how their organization started their packaging journey. For those of you who are just getting started, there's opportunities to either, bake in the extended costs, and from the very beginning, there are ways to make the business case and illustrate the ROI of a sustainable material transition. So with that, I'll kind of set Jane and Kate up to answer another question, right? Tell us a little bit more about how your organization started their packaging journey. Who did you work with? How did you get your goals set in place? Are there any material partners or associations, peer leaders that you helped, to learn from? I think we talk a lot about progress, not perfection, when it comes to sustainability, right? And we have a lot of audacious goals around packaging, but what do those incremental milestones look like along the way?
I can jump in. I'll go ahead and let's see. So for us, like our journey towards a plant-based flexible film, which I don't have one handy right now, but about a year ago, we transitioned 80+% of our tea production over to a plant-based flexible film. And that had been about, at least 10 years in the making. We were also a founding member of the OSC Packaging Collaborative, which really was, was the incentive behind that pre-competitive collaboration was to bring together resources around plant-based packaging where there really were none. So in the early days, Jake's been there since day one, and even going back to like Innovia, and there were iterations even before where we're at now. And I've been with Numi, coming up on 6 years now. And so when I entered, we were in like trial stages of a material called Matter B, that was this really funky material. That the best way I can describe it is that it was kind of smushy, right? So you would get like 50% conversion at the raw material stage, and that would kind of result in like 50% viability at the converter in printing stage, which would then result at like 50% viability at the actual like production trial on the floor with our product, which obviously is not what we're looking for here. So, but I mentioned that because, we have been, I can't even tell you how many production trials I've been to. The most amusing one was we had a material, and in every single one of these, we would have 3 or 4 different structures that we were trying just to see what would work in our machines, what would work with our sealing temperatures, which lamination would hold, which one was printing the best, just all different types of functionality that we were looking at. And initially, you've just got to get out there and start trying. And one of the funniest things I remember was one of the materials we were trying that we were really excited about. We had it in the machine. We were like all ready. We were all looking at the gearbox where like all the different components of the tea bag kind of come together in this carousel, and it gets put into the package, into the envelope, and we're like looking at it, like, holding our breath, and the machine started running, and it literally started throwing out the flip film at our faces, like hitting our protective eye gear, and which is, that's just kind of the way it goes. You have to be ready to just get in there and roll up your sleeves, have really good relationships with the production facility. If you don't own your own equipment, like we don't, we work with Copackers. So really, they need to be on your side and ready and willing to fit these production trials into their business flow, and be ready for failure. For us, a huge part of that journey was just seeing what worked and understanding that like Numi beta testing a lot of these materials was part of the journey of like the whole industry getting to something better. So really seeing ourselves within that context of that kind of bigger picture shift to a new materials economy. So, and then I think the other important thing on costing that I would also mention is that one of the things that we did do, because it is more expensive, that's certainly true. It is at this point, because of the subsidies that are in place around fossil fuels and the petroleum industry and the petrochemical industry, it is more expensive. So one of the things that we did was we reevaluated every single other component of our packaging and did a really competitive bidding process to drive down costs on our paperboard and our string and our tags, our master cases, everything else, so that we could, kind of eke out a little bit more space for the more expensive film.
Yeah, and you'll see too, when Kate talks a little bit about their journey, there are multiple ways to approach packaging transitions. Sometimes you're able to bake it in from day one before you even launch your product. And sometimes there's a bit more of an involved process, to Jane's point about this sort of like linear testing model, where you're starting with costing and barrier requirements and working with your co-manufacturers to find something that's viable. So groups like OSC's Packaging Collaborative really help to find solutions around crowdsourcing, shelf life testing, and field testing to make sure that the due diligence of the material actually performs as you expect it to once it gets into distribution. But Kate, I'll pass it to you to give us a little bit more insight on how you started your packaging journey at Oakland Coffee.
Yeah, so Alyssa had mentioned that Oakland Coffee and Numi came from very different places. We actually we decided not to launch the company until we had a compostable package, and we were able to do that because we were founded fairly recently. So it's been about 6 years now. So I mean, Numi faced these challenges of when you're working with one product and having to switch to another one, like that's just a whole other journey. And like, I have so much respect for you all, like keeping through with that, because it was not an easy journey getting started from scratch, but I know that it is way easier than starting on the other end. So, so yeah, we're very fortunate to meet Futamura, which used to be Inovia back in the day. They were incredibly helpful with getting us started. I mean, we're not packaging people, and so teaming up with Futamura and other companies like San Francisco Bay Coffee, which we've actually been working with them for about 5 years now, and we launched our single serve compostable pods with them. And so really just collaborating with other companies has been such a godsend, and I don't think we could have done it on our own, and I definitely do not suggest anyone else trying to go about it alone. There's so many companies doing amazing work that I mean, the whole idea of OSC trying to bring folks together in this packaging collaborative, it makes everything so much more simple, and it is so much easier to make an impact quicker when you're not reinventing the wheel. So I definitely suggest talking to other companies, getting involved. But yeah, so that's kind of where we came from. And I'm actually seeing quite a few questions on the Q&A right now. And I don't know if this is the best time to address these, but a lot of folks have been asking about third-party certification. And so we decided that we didn't want to launch a product that was called fully compostable until we had third-party certification, just because, as some of you have mentioned, there is a lot of greenwashing going on. And on the other end, there's a lot of companies in the plastic world that are very much trying to like combat compostable claims, which is just ridiculous to me. I can't imagine somebody wanting to halt progress on a more sustainable solution, but that is sadly the case. So we have worked really closely with the Biodegradable Products Institute, BPI, to get that third-party certification, just as kind of a backup, saying like, we're not the ones saying this is compostable. Folks that know much more than we do are saying it's compostable. And even though there are a lot of drawbacks, it's been really great being able to work with folks who are like on a different level in this industry, where like Jake and Futamura are coming from the packaging end and then coming in from more of the policy end. It's really helpful just to follow along with BPI and make sure that everything you're doing, they kind of greenlight. It'll make your journey a lot easier in the long run. So don't get discouraged. There's a lot of people to to kind of lead you along the way too. But we personally definitely suggest third-party certification.
Mm-hmm. And, just keeping in mind that this is all, the focus of OSC's collaborative is very much on scaling compostable, flexible films for the natural products industry. We see it as a way to reduce food waste. We see it as a way to combat climate change and the proliferation of plastics. And so as you expand, there's a whole world of sustainable fibers out there and, consumer facing labels like how to recycle and how to compost that provide you with a little bit more clarity on the consumer facing side too. So that being said, Jake, with your kind of more unique role in the packaging value chain, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of who are your go-to material partners, and are there any folks that you can kind of point us to help the attendees get started on their packaging goals?
Sure. So I'll do like a 10-second flexible packaging lesson for anyone who's just not super familiar. So basically, when you look at something like a coffee bag or a tea package, what may look and feel like a single film is more often than not multiple layers of material, sometimes up to 2 or 3 layers of different films that are brought together. And we do this because each material is imparting a different functional attribute to the final package. So with our material, NatureFlex, it prints very well and it has very good barrier to oxygen and moisture, but it doesn't seal very well. It has what we would call peelable seals. And we ourselves too, don't print or laminate films together. So we work with a lot of other companies who are co-suppliers in the industry. So folks like plastic suppliers, PSI, Dunn Paper on the paper side, BASF, other companies that are doing adhesives and inks. And then of course, we work very closely with our converter partner in OSC, Elk, out of Los Angeles. And so they're the ones who take all these different ingredients and kind of make the finished sandwich or lasagna. I always go back to food references with packaging. So think of it as like a sandwich or lasagna. They're putting everything together and delivering it to the brands. From the standpoint of industry groups, I would certainly recommend that anyone who's interested in this reaches out to BPI. Prior to last year, you had to have a certified product to be part of BPI. They've now opened it up through something called the stakeholder membership, which it basically means anyone, a brand, a retailer, a municipality, composters, they can all become part of BPI now and take part in the discussions around standards and procedures and legislation and just really be up to date on everything happening within BPI. And then OSC too, also, we started out with just Bay Area brands. Now that's expanded elsewhere. So, the Packaging Collaborative is another, really great resource. So yeah, I would say that there are a lot of companies out there today that are doing really interesting things, taking our materials, combining them with plant-based and compostable polymers that are being made from fermentation of bacteria or corn sugar, all these really cool things that are happening out there. So it's a very active space in the packaging world right now, is the bio-based and compostable side.
Yeah. Well, and 25 of the biggest CPG companies have all made packaging commitments by like 2025 or 2030. And I think they're feeling the pressure. Those dates are quickly approaching. And so there's an increase in demand for sustainable materials, which hopefully will drive some scale and some reduced costs for us moving forward. So, you have all of these peers in the space that you can connect with. For example, when I joined Justin's Nut Butter to build their sustainability programs from the ground up, I learned more in a 30-minute call with Antoine at Alter Eco than I learned in, 2 weeks of research around scalable packaging solutions. So to the point of the panelists today, right, there's a lot of opportunity in working with your peers to crowdsource solutions. And kind of on the topic of, costs, right? What trends, and this is a question for everyone, what trends are you seeing around costs for sustainable packaging? Most of us know that normally there's a cost increase associated with sustainable materials. So as costs are hopefully going down, how does your company, justify the expense? We can start with Jane this time.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a great question. I think if we had just looked at the cost, when we started on this journey, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have gotten very far. So, I think the first thing I would say is think about your goals and, try to just make the leap of faith that you're going to figure out how to make it work. And if it's aligned with your brand values and your goals, that, you will have the payoff in terms of, your consumer response and industry response and the other opportunities that it opens up for you for, taking action that's aligned with your mission.
Mm-hmm.
The cost is a, kind of a constantly moving target. There are lots of new materials all the time, and I think that's going to hopefully, benefit cost and increase competition and bring costs down. This is still a nascent industry, so it may require you to get creative, like as we had to do with cutting costs elsewhere to make room for this in our overall COGS. But those are conversations, that you can have internally with your sourcing team, with your executive team to really figure out, how to make this fit in and where to allocate it. And I know too that, and I'm not sure how relevant this would be, but, there are some tax credits. Alyssa, maybe you could touch on that briefly. Like I know Baker Tilly is doing some work on that, on how brands can access some of the innovation tax credits, R&D tax credits that may help with some of the early stage testing and trialing of the materials to help offset some of that to begin with.
Yeah. And shameless plug for the Packaging Collaborative again is we bring in subject matter experts across the spectrum of the value chain, right? Everyone from folks like Jake who are producing something like NatureFlex to people like Elk who are really converting and providing a finished product. But we brought in Baker Tilly to give us some overview and insight around the potential R&D tax credits for sustainable materials. And so there are income tax credits, there are R&D tax credits. There's a variety of platforms right now, whether it's working with the EPA within the grant application for like source pollution and reduction, or diving into some of these tax credits. There are actually ways for you to offset some of your costs within these financial like accounting frameworks. But to our earlier point, right? Though it may be more expensive, that's because there is literally no true cost accounting model that's capturing the negative externalities around plastics and the resource use associated with packaging. So you're looking at the costs from like a very black and white like platform, but at the end of the day, the cost to the environment, the cost to the health of your consumers who are being, I guess BPA is just being thrown at everyone all the time. And now they're talking about how that impacts our fertility. There's so many different things that aren't currently captured in the pricing of petroleum-based plastics. So
yeah, and I think, to that point, like for us in our first year of making the switch over to plant-based, just in that first year, that we displaced the demand for 14.3 metric tons of virgin plastic, which is huge, right? And so that, that's where there is this kind of benefit to the brand. We can now share that with our customers. That helps us with, before the pandemic, we were one of the major inroads we were having with institutional customers and large kind of food service customers where, many of those customers were making their own zero waste commitments. And so putting our product into their food program for their employees or for their staff or for their students or whomever helped them to meet their goals as a much larger organization. So, that we have seen very clear opportunities open up for us because of the commitment that we've made to being a plant-based packaging brand and to having this earth-to-earth packaging commitment that actually does, create new sales opportunities for us, which I think, obviously pays off.
Yeah. And Jane did a great consumer insight study as a part of her making the ROI, the business case for her material transition. So would encourage you to dive into what are your retail partners doing? What are your competitors in this space doing? What resonates with your consumers? Because those are all pieces that can inform a greater discussion with your kind of C-suite team to get that buy-in. But throwing it, I think maybe now to Kate, since you baked it in from day one, obviously there was an intrinsic value there and margins were maybe less at the forefront than maybe for folks who are making the transition later in the game.
Yeah, I mean, actual margins were definitely not a thing we were dealing with since we had never had a regular package. But of course, just the knowledge of knowing what normal plastic packaging costs versus like, there's always that itch in the back of the brain of like, oh, like, can I really afford this? But what Jane mentioned at the very end is the the consumer space and the consumer demand for compostables is huge. And even though we don't pass on the cost to our consumers, I mean, coffee, there's so many coffee companies that are amazing. And if we have the same organic, fairly traded coffee at the same price as another company, we're seeing a lot of consumers say, hey, that compostable packaging was actually the difference between me choosing your coffee or this other coffee. So we have seen a lot of folks moving over in that natural marketing of just folks like really wanting to go compostable. And what we always say is you have to give somebody the exact same thing that they're using already, or else it's not going to be worth it for them. People are creatures of habit. And so if we came out with a product that was super revolutionary and compostable, but like way different than what people were used to, say like for the K-Cups that we do, if we told people, oh, stop using K-Cups, go to a different method, nobody's going to do that. Like they want to just keep going with kind of the easiest road. And so we've found that just giving a compostable option to what people are already doing was enough to drive people over and make that conversion. And then as we get more customers and grow the business, that also, I mean, the more we can make, the cheaper it's going to be. So it's just kind of a nice little loop.
Yeah. And I feel like Jake too, can give a little bit more color to that. He recently was part of a presentation to the Packaging Collaborative members where they talked about trends and new materials and kind of an increase in demand. So I don't know, Jake, what's kind of your go-to response when you talk to folks about costing and how they should consider it? And what are some hopeful, facts that you can share with the attendees today on where we might be looking in terms of demand and scale?
Sorry. Yeah, well, certainly demand is increasing, as you mentioned. Brands kind of marching towards their 2025 or 2030 goals. So we've seen really unprecedented demand in the last 18 months or so. From a cost standpoint, I think these materials, obviously today we're operating at a level that's not nearly the scale of conventional plastics, and so we have that kind of working against us. But I think these materials, while they may start to come down with scale, are always going to kind of be at a premium because conventional plastics are probably cheaper than they really should be, based on some of the external things that you mentioned. I would say that against conventional plastics, these biopolymers and things that we're working with are probably a little less volatile. Seen a lot of ups and downs in the past, especially the past 3 to 6 months in conventional plastics. Just being tied to petroleum, pricing for that type of packaging can go all over the place, as can supply. So long term, I think as we reach scale, they'll might start to come down or equalize, but probably won't ever be as cheap as current plastics are today. That being said, when you look at this as kind of an overall thing as part of your business, to Jane's point, thinking about how to allocate this spend in a creative way. I mean, it's more than just a line item on a cost of goods statement. This is really something that you can use to market your brand and your company. So think about allocating marketing dollars towards your packaging budget rather than just thinking about it as that standard cost. Think about what this will do for your brand from a sales perspective. Try to close that delta by adding new sales. We have a lot of customers who've come to us and said, I was on the bottom shelf at Target and I switched to compostable packaging and now I'm at eye level. So this is doing great things for my brand. Or I've been trying to get into Whole Foods for the last year and it was this change to a compostable package that was kind of the last thing that helped me get my foot into that door. So there are a lot of benefits that are harder to quantify, but that can really overall help to close that delta between what's being spent extra in the more sustainable packaging.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a differentiator in the marketplace. And like I mentioned, if you can find ways to align, I know we had a question in the Q&A, but I always say the first step, start with a materiality assessment. What's material to your internal stakeholders? What's material to your consumers and your retail partners? How are your competitors positioning themselves on the topic? Because those are really clear pathways to an ROI for your business. And to Jake's point, can really start to help quantify the offsets and the increased costs through a return. And I think most of you, if not all of you who are on this call today, are representing a mission-driven brand. So I think we all know in our hearts that this is the right thing to do and the right steps to take, but it's certainly always easier to make that transition when you have an ROI model at play there. So anyways, so I think the next question for me is, you know, what are the R&D considerations, right? I think we briefly touched on some of the elements of kind of this linear testing model, from conception of you want to have a sustainable packaging to what do you need to do to get it to function well in the marketplace. And maybe each of you can share, you know, a quick overview of some of the tests that you worked on and the considerations you took into the launch of your materials.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts really with, there's a number of things. I mean, first of all is like barrier. You know, you need to think about what do you need to protect your product, right? So for us, you know, we've gone through the trouble of sourcing, you know, directly sourcing these beautiful herbs and botanicals from all over the world. And, you know, they need to arrive to the consumer in a premium, you know, condition, right? So we have certain oxygen and moisture barrier properties that must be met, you know, at a minimum in order for that product quality to be maintained through the supply chain. That's first and foremost. And then after that, it's really, you know, how do these materials run on your machines? So that's going to have to do with everything from like something called the coefficient of friction, like how do they actually move through the production machinery, you know, the strength of the seal, you know, does it seal at the temperature that your machines run on, and how well does that seal hold? How the lamination of the layers together, you know, how are they sticking together? How well are they sticking together? How does that work in your supply chain given your required storage conditions? And that's going to be different if you need cold storage or freezer storage. You know, we have a benefit of our materials, you know, being at ambient storage, you know, throughout the life cycle of the product. But it gets a little more complicated if you are in a cold chain environment. So, you know, those are, I think, some of the variables that you're going to have to work through for sure.
Yeah. And how about you, Kate? What kind of process did you all go through?
Oh man, Jake can tell you how many iterations we went through. Coffee is a really interesting substance too, because it's incredibly oily and it cannot come into contact with oxygen. So actually the hardest part for us was really figuring out the valve situation. If you have a product that needs to off gas but cannot have any oxygen enter the thing, we were able to find a producer. I think he's still the only one maybe in the country or the world who could do this compostable one-way valve. So finding him was kind of this magical moment. But also just with the films, another thing to definitely think about is if you have an oily substance, definitely think about what your final artwork is going to look like on the package, because it definitely can affect the end product. We can't use any white, like full white on our packaging, because the materials, I mean, they're wonderful. They stay incredibly shelf stable for a while, but once that oil starts breaking down, just make sure you're thinking, okay, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months out, like what is this package going to look like? And we also, this is one of our older bags, but you can tell it gets quite wrinkly. So there's just a lot of aesthetic things that you should also keep in mind with making sure that it's shelf stable is one thing, but making sure somebody wants to grab it off of a shelf is another. But those are all things that you can absolutely work around. It's just keeping in mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And thinking beyond flexible films, right? If you're looking at, like, if you have a clear jar for maybe a nut butter, right? And you want to look towards 100% post-consumer recycled content, it is very likely you're going to see some yellowing or browning of that clear jar as a result of the recycled content. There's a whole process behind it where everything's recycled, it's pelletized, it's treated, it becomes a food grade reusable PCR material. And so to Kate's point, there are likely some trade-offs there, but for most of the brands considering these transitions, a little bit of discoloration is the least of their worries. I think they're more concerned about their environmental footprint than that. So it's certainly something to think about. But usually you can work similarly to what both Kate and Jane have, is to figure out a way to design your package in a way that accounts for some of that gradation, I guess.
Absolutely.
Jake, any thoughts on that too?
Well, the other piece of testing that I would add is the at the end of, like, once you do have your structure, then you are going to have to go through, like, we've done the ASTM D6868 testing, which is all the lab validation on the compostability. It's the 84-day disintegration trial. We had to go through that a couple times and re-engineer the packaging layers, based on the results, because things didn't work quite the way we thought they would. So, be aware that there's that layer too.
And something I'll add to that too. Yeah, that's a great point. Thinking of that from the onset is definitely a good idea, because that will help to steer, the material design, certainly. And then also I would say definitely get your co-packer involved early and often. These materials, run differently. They take a bit of a learning curve, to run. So definitely make sure that your co-packer, if you're not doing, the manufacturing yourself or outsourcing any part of the packaging, make sure they're involved from the get-go. Jane and Kate, I mean, you guys have had phenomenal partners, in this, so that's been great, but it's not always the case. So certainly think about co-packing from the get-go, thinking about your distribution and how that works. If there's anything, that, the packaging is going to be exposed to throughout its journey, from packaging to the consumer, that you have to think about. Is it going to be, put in cold storage at any point? Is it exposed to any sort of, difficult physical conditions? Is it being moved around in a box? Is it going to get on a truck and drive over the Rocky Mountains? Things like that, I think are certainly important to understand and think about from the get-go also.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. Well, as we kind of get to the point of wrapping things up today, you've had a chance to share what some of the challenges are, right? It's hard to get consumers to deliver it to the right point. It's hard to make a material transition, but ultimately there's also a lot of solutions around that. And I know we had some questions around the acceptance of compostable materials. And I mentioned that we're working on a whole field test pilot with the Composter Manufacturing Alliance and pulling together a case study, and BPI is doing some similar work with a recent workshop that they held to bring, manufacturers and composters together to crowdsource a solution. This is where I normally advocate for policy reform. Washington has some great labeling requirements. We've got a lot of producer responsibility bills up for grabs this year. And so there's a lot of due diligence when it comes to sustainable packaging, but policy and consumer education definitely need to be a part of your overall strategy. So with that being said, as we wrap up, I'm hoping the panelists can kind of end their conversation together today with one key piece of advice that you would give companies to help start their packaging journey, or at least gain some momentum on what they've already got in play. And Jake, I'll pick you first this time.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. I would just, if I'm thinking about starting out, I would say, definitely know your product. As mentioned, barrier requirements, what are the non-negotiables? What can I handle from an aesthetic standpoint? Do I need 24 shelf month life, or can I get by with 18 months if that is something that's going to come into play? What is my qualification process? And really, what am I really going for as a brand? Am I looking to reduce the carbon footprint of my packaging? Am I looking for an alternate end of life? I'm trying to reduce the amount of materials. Having, thought about those questions and having those answers, I think, is really important when you start speaking to the material manufacturers, because that will ultimately guide, the types of materials that we can specify into a finished package. Is a compostable plant-based but GMO input, is that, suitable? Really have a thought about some of those questions, and just really understand your process. And that's really the best place to start.
Great. Thanks for that helpful advice, Jake. And Kate, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, what I mentioned at the very beginning and all of you being here is kind of the first start of just talk to people. Like definitely don't try to go about this on your own. You don't have to. I think that's the biggest thing is there are so many amazing companies and organizations trying to do the same work that you're doing, and having a collaborative really just makes it so much easier, but also it will help you remember that what you're doing is attainable and important, because along the way it will get challenging and it will discourage you a lot, but it's just, I mean, moments like this, I'm always like, oh yeah, okay, this is why we do it. Just seeing all of you and seeing 60 participants on here, I'm really excited about the future of compostables just from this little capture. So thank you.
Well, and I will always say, no matter what, I'm working with these 3 and 40 other companies within the OSC Packaging Collaborative. And every time we connect, I always leave feeling inspired about the creativity and the dynamics around making these types of transitions and how you're engaging all sorts of stakeholders in the process too. So Jane, what's your last piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that Kate and Jake have said. I think really the most important thing is starting and, being curious and having an open mind, and throughout the process, being ready and willing to, reassess your assumptions about things, because you're going to learn so much, and, there will be some things that'll be disappointing, and, there'll be new opportunities. And I think the most important thing is that, we're all participating in kind of an unscripted journey towards a new materials economy, and just as our products are all unique, each of our solutions is going to be unique, and we don't have a perfect answer right now, but we're all part of that conversation in making that plastic-free future a reality, and making this transition into a new, clean materials economy a reality. So keep that in mind.
It's a systems level shift that requires all of us to make it come to fruition, right? It's taken so many decades and so many stakeholders and so many millions and billions of pounds of plastic to get us to the crisis that we're in today. And it's going to take a significant amount of work to move the needle in the right direction. But like I said, I'm always feeling incredibly optimistic. And when like-minded minds get together, you're always going to be inspired by their creative solutions. So with that, I just want to thank you all again for attending this quick panel with us. If you ever have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out. I know to me, and I'm sure the other panelists are open about sharing their contact information as well. So with that, we'll throw it back to Pete to close us out.
Alyssa, Kate, Jake, Jane, thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for providing all the resources, all the guidance, and just telling the stories of your journeys. I think it's vital that everybody hears it. This can be a daunting endeavor, for many companies to start to try and enter into. There are resources that are out there. There are folks that can help you, as Kate and Jane and Jake all shared. So please feel free to reach out to the folks at OSC. Feel free to join in on the conversation. There's a link in chat on the LinkedIn group to carry on this conversation, to continue to ask questions and to get answers. And please follow up with the panelists that were here today. They have a wealth of information and can share their stories that will be able to help you and to be able to save you time, money, and energy as you start your journey. So with that, I want to say thank you. Please continue to tune in. There are some other great programs that are going to be offered up as a part of Naturally Network's overall Earth Week series tomorrow with Naturally Boulder. Check out the page, more info there, all free, all good, and look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thanks from Naturally Bay Area. Thank you all.